We know very little of the Valyrian Freehold, the civilization in the world of ice and fire that was wiped out by the Doom, alongside nearly all of its magic, knowledge and lore. What we do know is that the Valyrians practiced dark arts, binded dragons to their will, and grew to consider themselves closer to gods than to men, while claiming to have the blood of the dragon. There are many theories, both in and out of universe, to explain how Valyrians were able to tame and control their dragons. We know that they used spells and horns to aid themselves, and if the red sowing is any indication, possessing Valyrian blood was indeed necessary to have that control. Valyrian magic was rooted in blood and fire, and it was blood in particular that was central to that equation. The blood of the dragon was not just some empty boast, but the answer to the Valyrian dragon bonds. Or should I say, the DNA of the dragon. Before we start, remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video. Also, you can listen to this on Spotify if you prefer. Check the link in the description. A small disclaimer before we proceed. I am not a biologist or a scientist, just a massive nerd. I try to present the information I found as faithfully as possible, relying on a wide variety of sources written by professionals. However, I may not fully grasp them or make mistakes along the way, so if you have necessary credentials, please feel free to correct me in the comments. The concept of humans using science to enhance their bodies is something associated mostly with speculative science fiction, but looking at our history, the question of human enhancement has actually fascinated our species since the dawn of time. David Mesci in Human Enhancement, The Scientific and Ethical Dimensions of Striving for Perfection, published in Pew Research, makes such an argument. Human enhancement is at least as old as human civilization. People have been trying to enhance their physical and mental capabilities for thousands of years, sometimes successfully, and sometimes with inconclusive, comic, and even tragic results. Up to this point in history, however, most biomedical interventions, whether successful or not, have attempted to restore something perceived to be deficient, such as vision, hearing, or mobility. Even when these interventions have tried to improve on nature, say with anabolic steroids to stimulate muscle growth or drugs such as Ritalin to sharpen focus, the results have tended to be relatively modest and incremental. But thanks to recent scientific developments in areas such as biotechnology, information technology, and nanotechnology, humanity might be on the cusp of an enhancement revolution. In the next 2 or 3 decades, people may have the option to change themselves and their children in ways that, up to now, have existed largely in the minds of science fiction writers and creators of comic book superheroes. 20th century saw scientific progress reaching previously unknown heights, and it was then when human enhancement gradually shifted from fixing something deficient to altering your body and mind in ways previously not possible. With it, the idea of transhumanism emerged for the first time. Transhumanism is a political and philosophical movement positioning that human beings should be permitted to use technology to modify and enhance human cognition and bodily function, expanding abilities and capacities beyond current biological constraints. The fundamentals of what would later become transhumanism have first been laid as early as in 1923 by the British geneticist G.B.S. Haldane. In his essay Daedalus, or Science and the Future, he echoes the idea that human enhancement existed in our consciousness long before modern science. The chemical or physical inventor is always a Prometheus. There is no great invention, from fire to flying, which has not been hailed as an insult to some god. But if every physical and chemical invention is a blasphemy, every biological invention is a perversion. There is hardly one which, on first being brought to the notice of an observer from any nation which had not previously heard of their existence, would not appear to him as indecent and unnatural. I fancy that sentimental interest attaching to Prometheus has unduly distracted our attention from the far more interesting figure of Daedalus. It is with infinite relief that, amidst a welter of heroes, armed with gorgons' heads or protected by Stygian baptisms, the student of Greek mythology comes across the first modern man. Beginning as a realistic sculptor, it was natural that he should proceed to the construction of an image of Aphrodite whose limbs were activated by quicksilver. After this, his interests inevitably turned to biological problems, and it is safe to say that posterity has never equaled his only recorded success in experimental genetics. Had the housing and feeding of the Minotaur been less expensive, it is probable that Daedalus would have anticipated Mendel. But Minos held that a labyrinth and an annual provision of 50 youths and 50 virgins were excessive as an endowment for research, and in order to escape from his ruthless economies, Daedalus was forced to invent the art of flying. It was in 1957, already after the discovery of the precise structure of the DNA, that transhumanism emerged as a viable ideology. The term was first used by Julian Huxley, a British biologist generally regarded as its founder. Up till now, human life has generally been, as Hobbes described it, nasty, brutish and short. The great majority of human beings, if they have not already died young, have been afflicted with misery. We can justifiably hold the belief that this land of possibility exists, and that the present limitations and miserable frustrations of our existence could be in large measure surmounted. The human species can, if it wishes, transcend itself, not just sporadically, an individual here in one way, an individual there in another way, but in its entirety, as humanity. Of course, transhumanism was, and still is, a controversial idea. Many thinkers from different disciplines and faith traditions worry that radical changes will lead to people who are no longer either physically or psychologically human. Even minor enhancements, critics say, might end up doing more harm than good. For instance, they contend, those with enhancements may lack empathy and compassion for those who have not chosen or cannot afford these new technologies. Indeed, they say, transhumanism could very well create an even wider gap between the haves and have-nots, and lead to new kinds of exploitation, or even slavery. The movie Gattaca with Uma Thurman and Ethan Hawke tackles precisely this issue. It presents a world in near future where genetic enhancement at the embryonic level, followed by in vitro fertilization, is the norm, and those conceived naturally and without enhancements are delegated to the lowest stratas of society. I don't really like this movie. I feel like it falls very flat as a criticism of eugenics due to several narrative choices, but it's there somewhat. I may even make a video about it one day. It cannot be stressed enough how monumental the discovery of the DNA's precise structure was to science, and the ideas of human enhancements further down the line. Many incorrectly believe that the DNA was first discovered incredibly late, in 1953, but it was actually in the late 1860s that DNA was first extracted by a Swiss chemist, Friedrich Mischer. 1953, on the other hand, was a year when the groundbreaking discovery was made, that the DNA molecule exists in the form of a three-dimensional double helix. In the 50s, various scientists were racing to be the first ones to discover the structure of the DNA. The final discovery is usually attributed to James D. Watson and Francis Crick. It would not, however, be possible without Rosalind Franklin's previous research, mastery, and improvement of the crystallography, or X-ray diffraction, a technique used to determine the atomic structure of crystals. Most historians believe that she had no idea that her research was being distributed further. In 1953, Watson and Crick made history by publishing a new model of the DNA code. However, Franklin was not credited or even mentioned. In 1962, Watson and Crick were awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology and Medicine for the discovery of the double helix. At that point, Rosalind Franklin was already dead, having succumbed to ovarian cancer. Many people believe that Franklin has been robbed of the prize and point it as a proof of sexism women face in the scientific fields. I'm inclined to agree. DNA is a molecule located in the cell nucleus, though some small amounts of it are also found in the mitochondria. It consists of two strands that twist in the shape of the double helix. A nitrogenous base is an organic molecule, and there are 4 nitrogenous bases in the DNA molecules: cytosine, guanine, adenine, and thymine, abbreviated as C, G, A, and T. The sequence of nitrogenous bases matches up with the sequence on the other strand, A with T and C with G. Knowing the structure of the DNA allowed scientists to manipulate it in the process of genetic engineering, defined as the deliberate modification of the characteristics of an organism by manipulating its genetic material. It can be conducted by changing one single base, A, T, C, or G, to alter the function of a gene, or deleting or inserting a whole gene or region of DNA, or extracting DNA from other organism genome and combining it with the DNA of the individual. Genetic engineering is used by scientists to enhance or modify the characteristics of an individual organism. And, like mentioned previously, this is not just something in speculative fiction. Mesci mentions a wide variety of possible enhancements that are either already possible to science or are something that may be possible in the very near future, such as creation of synthetic blood or brain chips that could make paralyzed patients walk again. But certainly, the most revolutionary is the invention of CRISPR. One of the most important developments in recent years involves a new gene splicing technique called cluster regularly interspaced short palindromic repeats. Known by its acronym CRISPR, this new method greatly improves scientists' ability to accurately and efficiently edit the human genome in both embryos and adults. CRISPR is already dramatically expanding the realm of what is possible in the field of genetic engineering. Indeed, on June 21, 2016, the US government announced that it had approved the first human trials using CRISPR, in this case to strengthen the cancer-fighting properties of the immune systems of patients suffering from melanoma and other deadly cancers. CRISPR's power and versatility have opened up new and wide-ranging possibilities across biology and medicine, says Jennifer Doudna, a researcher at the University of California at Berkeley and co-inventor of CRISPR. According to Doudna and others, CRISPR could provide new treatments or even cures to some of today's most feared diseases, not only cancer, but Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, and others. How do all of the things that I've just yapped about relate to A Song of Ice and Fire? Well, of course, I wanted to share my research on everything I read to prepare myself for this video, but it was just one of the reasons. I believe that the Valyrians were the very first genetic engineers of Planetos. Perhaps to call them that or position that they were transhumanists themselves would be a bit anachronistic, considering that the Valyrians did not have access to scientific knowledge that we have, nor laboratories and other tools that could allow them to do that. However, I find that author George R.R. Martin has a tendency to follow scientific principles rooted in realism in how he constructs his world building, even the elements rooted in magic. Fantasy needs magic in it, but I try to control the magic very strictly. You can have too much magic in fantasy very easily, and then it overwhelms everything, and you lose all sense of realism. In A Song of Ice and Fire, I set out to blend the wonder of epic fantasy with the grittiness of the best historical fiction. There is magic in my world, yes, but much less of it than one gets in most fantasy. I would have dragons, yes, in part because of my dear friend, the late Phyllis Einstein, a marvelous fantasist and science fiction writer in her own right, now sadly missed. But I wanted my dragons to be as real and believable as such a creature could ever be. I designed my dragons with a lot of care. They fly and breathe fire, yes, those traits seemed essential to me. They have 2 legs, not 4, never 4, and 2 wings, large wings. A lot of fantasy dragons have these itty-bitty wings that would never get such a creature off the ground. And only 2 legs. The wings and the 4 legs. 4-legged dragons exist only in heraldry. No animal that has ever lived on Earth has 6 limbs. Birds have 2 legs and 2 wings. Bats the same. Ditto, pteranodons and other flying dinosaurs, etc. Song's dragons are about as realistic as a magical fire-breathing creature can be. They are intelligent, but they don't talk. They form telepathic bonds with their riders and breathe fire, but other than that, they act like animals. They hunt, they create lairs, they are territorial and not nomadic. George follows scientific phenomena in how he constructs his magical elements, and that gives power to the hypothesis that whatever enhancements the Valyrians applied to themselves could have happened at the level of the DNA, even if they did not have the knowledge of its existence and structure. Rather than to use CRISPR, that genetic engineering was conducted via blood magic. The Maesters in the World of Ice and Fire seem to be aware that physical traits are inheritable. The great beauty of the Valyrians, with their hair of palest silver or gold and eyes in shades of purple not found among any other peoples of the world, is well known, and often held up as proof that the Valyrians are not entirely of the same blood as other men. Yet there are Maesters who point out that by careful breeding of animals, one can achieve a desirable result, and that populations in isolation can often show quite remarkable variations from what might be regarded as common. The unusual physical traits of the Valyrians, with their silver hair, purple eyes and inhumane beauty, might indeed be explained by their inbreeding, but there is far more ambiguity in how that relates to their dragon bonds. As Yandel puts it does not explain the affinity with dragons that those with the blood of Valyria clearly had. That the Valyrian dragon bond seems to be a matter of genetic manipulation in whatever capacity they possessed, while not having the knowledge of the structure of the DNA, the precise concept of genetics, or tools such as CRISPR can be extrapolated from several puzzling pieces of information given to us throughout the lore book. Sheltered there, amidst the great volcanic mountains, known as the 14 Flames, were the Valyrians, who learned to tame dragons and make them the most fearsome weapon of war that the world has ever saw. The tales the Valyrians told of themselves claimed they were descended from dragons and were kin to the ones they now controlled. The tradition among the Targaryens had always been to marry kin to kin. Wedding brother to sister was thought to be ideal. Failing that, a girl might wed an uncle, a cousin, or a nephew, a boy, a cousin, aunt or niece. This practice went back to old Valyria, where it was common amongst many of the ancient families, particularly those who bred and rode dragons. The blood of the dragon must remain pure, the wisdom went. Is the blood of the dragon not the closest equivalent to the inheritance of various traits at the genetic level? Blood is often used as a synonym to kinship. He is my blood flows in her veins. The more precise words would be, he has my genes flow in the molecules of her DNA. The term blood is used instead, since that word did not yet have their measure to discover DNA. So when the Valyrians say, we are the blood of the dragon, they do not lie. The more precise expression in this case would be, we have the DNA of the dragon, especially given the other claim. The tales the Valyrians told of themselves claimed they were descended from dragons and were kin to the ones they now controlled. Blood of the dragon means exactly that. They do have literal dragon DNA flowing through their veins. And this is why, in order to preserve the dragon bonding ability, they needed to intermarry with those of the same genetic traits. They knew that the dragon bonding ability is inheritable and stored in their blood, and thus, crossbreeding with those without the dragon DNA would potentially dilute this ability in the offspring. Valyrian sphinxes are a somewhat interesting hint to this hypothesis. A sphinx is a hybrid, a mythical creature with the head of a human, the body of a lion, and the wings of an eagle. But the Valyrian sphinxes are different, and I believe that they are a metaphorical representation of the Valyrians themselves. The next evening they came upon a huge Valyrian sphinx, crouched beside the road. It had a dragon's body and a woman's face. There is also speculation that the Valyrian dragons were the result of genetic experimentation. In Septon birthed dragons, worms and wyverns, he speculated that the blood mages of Valyria used wyvern stock to create dragons. Though the blood mages were alleged to have experimented mightily with their unnatural arts, this claim is considered far-fetched by most maesters. Among them, Maesters Vanion's Against the Unnatural contains certain proofs of dragons having existed in Westeros, even in the earliest of days, before Valyria rose to be a power. Barth is probably the most knowledgeable person about dragons in universe, and George R. R. Martin confirmed that he got most of the dragon lore right. They bond with men, some men, and the why and how of that, and how it came to be, will eventually be revealed in more detail in The Winds of Winter and A Dream of Spring, and some in Blood and Fire. Septon Barth got much of it right. Interestingly, the Citadel itself rejected most of Barth's claims, but if he got much of it right, then perhaps that includes the claim that the Valyrians indeed created their dragons out of the wyvern stock, and that's why they are different from the dragons that once existed in Westeros. The Valyrians created their own dragons by crossbreeding various creatures until they achieved their desired outcome, the very definition of early genetic engineering. And the Valyrians did not limit themselves to animals. A few of the cities away from the heart of Valyria remain inhabited, however, places founded by the freehold or subject to it. The most sinister of these is Mantares, a place where the men are said to be born twisted and monstrous. Some attribute this to the city's presence on the Demon Road. They would share this space with Yezan's other treasures: a boy with twisted, hairy goat legs, a two-headed girl out of Mantares, a bearded woman, and a willowy creature called Sweets, who dress in moonstones and Mirish lace. Mantares was a city under the Valyrian yoke, where today's inhabitants are said to be twisted and monstrous. This could be the remains of Valyrian genetic experiments, but perhaps the most damning piece of evidence that the Valyrians crossbred humans is what was happening on Gogossos. The largest of the basilisks is the Isle of Tears. Founded by the old Empire of Geese, it was known as Gorgai for close on 2 centuries, or perhaps 4, there is some dispute, until the Dragon Lords of Valyria captured it during the Third Giscari War and renamed it Gogossos. By any name, it was an evil place. The Dragon Lords sent their worst criminals to the Isle of Tears to live out their lives in hard labor. In the dungeons of Gogossos, torturers devised new torments. In the flesh pits, blood sorcery of the darkest sort was practiced, as beasts were mated to slave women to bring forth twisted half-human children. While the horrors going on in Gogossos were meant to bring suffering, the Valyrians must have known how to safely conduct these experiments on themselves. Else they wouldn't have become such a force to be reckoned with, and the dragon bonds wouldn't have been so peculiar. I wonder if maybe somehow the Valyrians were even more advanced than we give them credit for. They seem to have been aware of the inheritance of not only physical traits, but also that modified DNA, the blood of the dragon, and did not want other gene pools to enter their offspring to possibly dilute it. So what if, indeed, they figured out the concept of genetics? Maybe they even knew that the DNA is a double helix. What if that dark unnatural sorcery was actually advanced scientific knowledge? Not very likely, but it's an interesting thing to ponder about. Valyrian experiments had, however, brought undesirable results further down the line. Fire and Blood reveals several of them. The first one is the case of Laena Velaryon, daughter of Bela and Alyn. The first omen of the dark times to come was seen on Driftmark, when the dragon's eggs presented to Laena Velaryon upon her birth quickened and hatched. Her parents' pride and pleasure quickly turned to ash, however. The dragon that wriggled from the egg was a monstrosity, a wingless worm, maggot-white and blind. Within moments of hatching, the creature turned upon the babe in her cradle and tore a bloody chunk from her arm. As Laena shrieked, Lord Oakenfist stripped the dragon of her, flung it to the floor, and hacked it into pieces. If the theory of Valyrians crossbreeding dragons and worms was correct, that would mean that either this was not really a dragon egg, the hypothesis I subscribe to, that it was genetically faulty. Further evidence of how badly the Valyrian crossbreeding could backfire is the strange and horrifying case of Aeria Targaryen. Septon Barth puts forward a convincing theory that, after Aeria escaped on Balerion's back, he most likely took her to Valyria, and there, she encountered something unspeakable. The girl was burning, her skin was flushed and red, and when I laid my hand upon her brow to learn how hot she was, it was as if I had thrust it into a pot of boiling oil. There was scarce an ounce of flesh upon her bones, so gaunt and starved did she appear, but we could observe certain swellings inside her, as her skin bulged out and then sank down again, as if... No, not as if, for this was the truth of it. There were things inside her, living things, moving and twisting, mayhaps searching for a way out, and giving her such pain that even the milk of the poppy gave her no sore kiss. The simplest way to say it that the poor child was cooking from within. Her flesh grew darker and darker, and then began to crack, until her skin resembled nothing so much. 7 save me, as pork cracklings. Thin tendrils of smoke issued from her mouth, her nose, even, most obscenely, from her nether lips. By then she had ceased to speak, though the things within her continued to move. Her very eyes cooked within her skull, and finally burst, like 2 eggs left in a pot of boiling water for too long. The things, Mother have mercy, I do not know how to speak of them. They were worms with faces, snakes with hands, twisting, slimy, unspeakable things that seemed to reel and pulse and squirm as they came bursting from her flesh. Some were no bigger than my little finger, but one at least was as long as my arm. Oh, warrior, protect me, these sounds they made. They died, though. I must remember that, cling to that. Whatever they might have been, they were creatures of heat and fire. And they did not love the ice, oh no. One after another, they trashed and writhed and died before my eyes. Thank thee, Seven. I will not presume to give them names. They were horrors. The Valyrians were more than dragon lords. They practiced blood magic and other dark arts as well, delving deep into the earth for secrets best left buried, and twisting the flesh of beasts and men to fashion monstrous and unnatural chimeras. For those sins the gods in their wrath struck them down. Valyria is accursed, all men agree, and even the boldest sailor steals well clear of its smoking bones. But we would be mistaken to believe that nothing lives there now. The things we found inside Aerea Targaryen live there now, I would submit, along with such other horrors as we cannot even begin to imagine. Aerea seemed to have been infected by some sort of a fiery parasite that looked like worms with human faces, something eerily similar to the human experimentation in Gogossos, where slave women were mated with beasts and produced half-human children. The remains of the Valyrian human experimentation dwell in the ruins of Valyria, and Aerea had the misfortune of encountering it. Going back to the subject of DNA, however, the Targaryens most definitely descend from one of the 40 Dragonlord families, and as such, they would have the DNA of the dragon. And that becomes evident when we look closer at some of the Stelberts children of Targaryen parents had. Some people attribute these Stelberts plaguing the dynasty to their practice of incest, but that does not explain how, in spite of generations of such inbreeding going back to their time in Valyria, they are not misshapen beyond recognition. The generations of inbreeding in the real-life Habsburg dynasty caused many of its members to suffer from various disabilities, with the most well-known case being Charles II of Spain. Inbreeding also decreases fertility, and yet the Valyrians did not all just die out before they could reach their level of power. And the incest most certainly does not explain why some of these Stelberts had draconic features. The first person to be plagued by these Stelberts was Maegor. His first marriage to Cerys Hightower was childless for more than a decade, which prompted him to take a second wife, Alice Haraway. 5 years later, Alice became pregnant, but went into an early labor, giving birth to a fetus that was eyeless and twisted. Maegor was eager to believe that it was due to Alice having an affair, and that the child was not actually his. The baby delivered by one of the Black Brides, Elinor Costain, is even more puzzling, since it was described as eyeless and with small wings. Officially, Tyanna of the Tower, one of the Maegor's wives and a rumored sorceress, confessed that she poisoned the babies. Maegor did not want to consider the possibility that he is the one at fault, even though he made sure to bed women of proven fertility, and these Stelberts persisted, proving that it was his genetic material that was at fault. There are various theories as to why Maegor specifically had these problems. The two I've seen the most commonly is the possibility that Maegor's conception itself was unnatural, or that it was because of Tyanna's magic that saved his life after the trial of the Seven. Whatever the case, neither of these options exclude the possibility that Maegor's genetic material, the one that possessed dragon DNA, had a role to play. Else at least one of his children would not have small wings. Later on, many Targaryen men and women married and had children with people who did not have Valyrian ancestry, and they usually did not have these issues, so it could not be because of a new gene pool. For instance, the children of Alicent and Viserys were all fine. Another instance of a dragon-like stillbirth was Visenya Targaryen, the only daughter of Rhaenyra Targaryen. Monster, monster, get out, get out, get out! When the babe at last came forth, she proved indeed a monster, a stillborn girl, twisted and malformed, with a hole in her chest where her heart should have been, and a stubby scaled tail. Thus, we have at least 2 confirmed cases of dragon-like stillbirths in the history of the dynasty, Visenya and Elinor's stillborn. But the first dragon fetus we saw on page was actually Rhaego. She waited, but Ser Jorah could not say it. His face grew dark with shame. He looked half a corpse himself. Monstrous, Miri Masdur finished for him. The knight was a powerful man, yet Dany understood in that moment that the Magi was stronger and crueler, and infinitely more dangerous. Twisted. I drew him forth myself. He was scaled like a lizard, blind, with the stub of a tail and the small leather wings like the wings of a bat. When I touched him, the flesh slot off the bone, and inside he was full of grey worms and the stink of corruption. He had been dead for years. We know that Rhaego was alive and kicking before Jorah and Dany entered the tent, but was dead and malformed when brought forward. But Rhaego's stillbirth and potentially Maegor's children had an additional component to it, the presence of blood magic, pointing to the fact that the Valyrian genetic engineering also had something to do with it. And here I invite you for another video where this idea shall be explored. Not this week, but sometime in the future. The hypothesis of Valyrians using blood magic to apply human enhancements to themselves is supported by many pieces of lore revealed throughout the World of Ice and Fire, Fire and Blood, and the main series. At least some part of the truth behind it shall be explored in the future installments of Martin's saga, as promised in one of his recent blog posts. The Valyrian experimentation with what could possibly be early genetic engineering brings forward the same questions that surround the idea of transhumanism. The Valyrians did enhance their bodies, but that led them precisely to the belief that they are above other men and that everyone else should be groveling at their feet. And as we see, such experiments can backfire in horrific ways. Yet, the Valyrian dragon bones are, at the same time, nothing short of beautiful. Think of Daenerys seeking strength in her dragon's eggs, Dreamfire roaring and breaking her chains upon Helena's suicide, or Caraxes roaring in pain when Nettles was forced to leave Daemon. So, as always with A Song of Ice and Fire, there is nuance to it all that should not be disregarded. By the way, what do you think of transhumanism? Do you agree with the arguments of its opponents, or do you believe that human race should transcend itself? Let me know in the comments. As of now, thanks for watching. Remember that if you like my content, like, subscribe and share so that more people can see it. Make sure to click the notification button so that you never miss a new video. And remember, Phoenix rises from the ashes, and ashes always land on top.